5,000 subscribers. Wow. I'm rich. Who's first? Juggling lessons. Woohoo! 1,000 Pine points for juggling lessons. Yeah, 5,000 subscribers is not bad for a guy who spends less than 10 seconds on thumbnails, who doesn't market himself at all, who actually encourages people to leave. I've encouraged many people to leave my channel. If you read some of my comments in my comment section, I say, please leave, don't watch my content. And a lot of people don't like this music I'm playing right now, and they begging me to stop it. And I said, no, if you really want to listen to me, you got to suffer. You got to suffer through it. I actually like the music. Will I be retiring now that I have 5,000 subs? Well, I am rich. I got 5,000 valuable subscribers. Verizon Wireless contacted me the other day and asked how much do I want per subscriber, and I said, sorry, my subscribers cannot be bought. Okay, let's get to the serious business. This video, I have a feeling, is going to find the eyeballs of many Christians in the future. Maybe not today, maybe not this week, but at some point, a lot of Christian couples are going to find this video. And full disclosure, if you're a Christian couple who finds this video in the future, I'm not a Christian. I used to be, but I'm not a Christian. And but I have two beautiful, wonderful children who are the product of in vitro fertilization. They're both test tube babies. So I can speak to this topic a little bit. And I had, me and my wife had these children while I was a Christian. My wife's still a Christian. But I was a Christian when we went through this process. So I totally understand the emotions, the feelings of being infertile and wanting children and not having it happen, and then dealing with Christianity. Now, this is what I want to say, but it's probably not going to be taken well. But what I want to say to the Christians listening is go ahead and disappoint your God. Go ahead and make him mad. Do it. Now, but I know that's not going to resonate with you. I know, actually, for some of you it will. But for most of you, that's blasphemy. That's like playing with danger, and that God might hurt you, cause problems in your life. But I feel so strongly about this that it's worth the risk to tell you guys that, to tell Christians that it's okay to make your God mad at you. It's okay for your God to say, I'm so disappointed when I look at the face of my child. It's okay to say that. When I was a Christian, I actually ran experiments on disappointing Jesus. This is when I was coming out of Christianity. And here's one of the experiments I ran to see if this God was real. I stopped tithing. I mean, cold turkey, to see what would happen. Is God going to punish me? Am I going to have problems in my life? I think what ended up happening, I had the best couple years of my business ever. Those were the good days, good old days when I stopped tithing. Now, I want to say this to Christians to actually experiment and test, but for most, they're just, the fear factor is way too high. They cannot do it. But I challenge Christians, go a full quarter, 3 months, zero tithing. And I want you to actually be a little bit scared when you do it. Be a little bit fearful. Actually expect God to hurt you, to punish you, because you're purposely doing something against his will. But I want you to experiment and try it anyhow. See if you're tough enough to handle it. See what happens. Another experiment you could do, this is off topic to in vitro fertilization, but another experiment you could try doing is try going 3 months without praying at all. Like, it's going to be hard. You're going to want to pray, and it will happen immediately. But as soon as you catch yourself praying, stop. See if you can do it, Christians, for 3 months. And you will be scared. You will be fearful. But run the experiment, see what happens. Do you think you'll get into more car accidents? Do you think you'll get into a car accident if you stop praying for a hedge of protection around you? See, these are things. I am often accused of saying that Christianity is a belief system of fear, carrots and sticks, but mostly the stick. But I honestly believe this. I honestly think that there are Christians listening who would never, ever tempt God like that, their God. They are terrified. To stop praying, that'd be like, man, what? They might go to hell. They might lose that relationship with the creator of the universe. To stop tithing, oh, God would hate that. He's commanded that you give back. Roy Wolf says, I haven't prayed in 2 years. I haven't prayed probably in 10 years, 15. Actually, that's not true. I prayed when Christians asked me to pray. And so, but yeah, not as a Christian. I haven't prayed in a long time. Thank you, Roger. I like what you do. So this is a topic that's very dear to my heart. My daughter was conceived in Calgary, Alberta, in a clinic, in a test tube, actually in a petri dish. One of the happiest days of my life when I found out. I was in Banff at the time, and I found out that my sperm caused the fertilization of an egg. My sperm count was extremely low. And my theory is because I was raised on a farm, and I also did, I have a master's in analytical chemistry, and my thesis was on heavy metals. I did a lot of work with heavy metals, mercury, lead, so forth. And I have a theory that kind of ruined my sperm count. So my sperm count was really low. So basically, the science is so good nowadays, they can take one sperm and take one egg and basically force the sperm into the egg and fertilize an egg. There's this fancy name for that, but I forget what it is. So I want to read, I don't think I've ever done this, is read an article. I usually do videos, but this made me a little bit upset. I'm going to try my hardest not to show any emotion here because I'm a stoic by nature. But this is why I think Christianity is evil, why it causes so much harm in society, because there are millions probably in the United States, infertile Christians who are not going to have children because of articles like this and views of Christianity like this. The quiet heartbreaking and pain of infertility is well known to many evangelicals, probably millions, whose aspirations to have a child have been frustrated for reasons they cannot understand or control. A lot of Christians think, well, I've prayed, God, why haven't you answered our prayers to have a child? It is frequently a secret burden that couples carry, which only emerges in the open as they reveal their struggles to family, friends, and doctors. Being infertile carries some negative baggage, especially in Christianity, because blessed is the, what's the verse? Basically, if you have kids, you're blessed. The weight of infertility and the value of children has increasingly prompted infertile couples to pursue procreation by every means possible. Artificial insemination, I've done that. In vitro fertilization, I've done that. And even surrogacy, I have not done that, have all found their way into evangelical communities. Yet while evangelicals have become increasingly aware of the emotional challenges infertility poses, we have not yet considered the hidden costs. See, this is it here. We have not yet considered the hidden costs of our desperate pursuit of children through artificial reproductive technologies. What are these hidden costs from the Christian's perspective? I think, in my opinion, I've skimmed this article, but I haven't read it. I think the hidden cost is, from the conservative evangelical perspective, is making God sad, making God mad. Sad and mad are the two things that Christians are scared of, making God being sad and mad. A few movies have brought forth these challenges in open, like Netflix, Private Life. I haven't seen this. We have not considered the hidden cost of our desperate pursuit of children, okay? So basically, there's a Netflix show about infertility. Okay, let's go back to this here. For many evangelicals, the ethics of in vitro fertilization begins and ends at the question of how many embryos are created and what happens to them. This is very true. I agree with this. Now, let me tell you a horrifying story from the Christian perspective. And that is, not with my daughter, but with my son. We told the in vitro doctor to only fertilize 3 eggs. 3. Because remember, we're both Christians at this point. And I'm trying to think back of my views of, I would have said that the soul starts at conception and that it's bad to get rid of an embryo, but I don't think I was that dogmatic about it. I really just wanted kids. And but we told the doctor, the in vitro doctor, to only fertilize 3. My wife, they pulled out 14 to 11, I forget the number, eggs out of her. And he fertilized all of them. And so now we were in a predicament as a Christian couple. What do we do with all these embryos? Because in his opinion, he'd just throw them down the sink. And we thought, no, that would make God mad or sad. So we don't want to do that. And so we put in 3 the first time, and it worked. And my son was conceived. Attached to the uterine lining. But now we had something like 11 or 12, I forget, 10 embryos left in the clinic. And we were thinking, what are we going to do with these? Can't throw them away because that make God mad or sad. So what we no joke, my wife and I were praying that God would take the lives of these souls, so we wouldn't have to put my wife at risk. Because remember, we already had 1. We only wanted 2. And every time you put in multiple embryos into the uterus, you risk having twins, triplets, and so forth. So it's a risk to the mother. So you don't want to put in more than 3. And I think what ended up happening after a few weeks, no, maybe 1 week, I should have kept a diary so all these details are clear. I think 4 or 5 or 6 died on their own. And so now we were left with 6, 7, or 8, something like that. And so we did the procedure 2 more times at a cost to us, hoping that we would not get, this is after my wife had the baby, had her son. And we were basically praying that it won't work. We were praying in vitro would not work, because it did work for us twice with my daughter and my son. It's just craziness. This type of Christianity causes craziness. And so when you think that this embryo has a soul, and if you throw it down the sink, well, most Christians believe that it's going to go to heaven. So this whole idea of embryos, like 16-cell organisms in heaven, really, Christians? Think about that. You really believe that? Like, even when I was a Christian, I was thinking, this is bizarre. This doesn't make sense. Maybe God makes them into their 21-year-old self in heaven. Because this has no memories, no thoughts, no brain, no nerves, no nothing. Okay. Beyond this, many evangelicals do not even think in vitro fertilization is a moral issue. Well, that's good. But what's this link here? Oh, yes. Abortion viewed immoral. Okay, you can't see this, but... Oh, here it is. Using in vitro fertilization, only 12% of adults in the United States say it's morally wrong. Good. That's pretty low. But my guess is almost all of them are conservative Christians. By the way, when me and my wife did in vitro fertilization, the initial reaction from my family, at least, was negative, that this is not natural. This is not what God intended. And so not only are we going through the struggle of infertility, but the judgment of family and friends even, saying, yeah, you know what, this could be sin. But again, if you're a Christian who's infertile, if you're a Christian couple watching who's infertile, I implore you, as a non-Christian, my cards are on the table, but I implore you, it's okay to make your God mad or sad at you. Go ahead and do it. What's the worst that you can happen? You think you're going to go to hell because of this? No. And if your God's going to send you to hell for wanting children, then do you really want to be a Christian in the first place? You can still believe in a God, but just reject that one. I shouldn't say stuff like this because it's just going to cause Christians to click off. But there's going to be some of them who are going to stick around, and what I'm saying is going to resonate with them. Why would it be when it seems to be simply a medical technology, let me scroll up, medical technology that helps couples satisfy their deep desires for what God has deemed good, namely the birth of a child made in God's image? Yes, if you're a Christian, having children is a blessing. To say no to such technologies is for many couples equivalent to saying no to the satisfaction of their deepest, most heartfelt desires. Yes, I agree with that. And but I don't think it's because of God. I think it's because of evolution. I think we have evolved to desire to procreate. And I actually think that if you are a human being who has not procreated, and especially if you're a human being who has not invested your life into children in some way, you're probably not going to be happy. And there's going to be a lot of atheists who are not going to like me saying this, but I think that's science. I think, especially if you're a woman and you've never had children or you haven't invested your life into the lives of children, I think we are programmed to not feel fulfilled. Let's see here. While not every couple experiences the direct marital hardship private life depicts, okay, that's that show on Netflix, there are serious costs to and from accepting technology that separate the one flesh union. Okay, so here we get into Genesis, one flesh union of husband and wife. We think these costs are high enough that evangelical couples and pastors should say no to in vitro fertilization. So my question was, what is the costs that this author is going to talk about, our authors? The cost of separating the idea of procreation from sex and that one flesh union. It's past time to break evangelicalism's silence about our complicity in the unethical circumstances that arise when sex and conception are divided. Yeah, this almost sounds like Roman Catholic to me. I think it's completely fine to separate sex from procreation. Now, I'm going to say something controversial. I actually think it would be better for society if we did. Can you imagine if we could separate sex from procreation on this planet? Now think about this for a second. Oh, I shouldn't say this. This is going to be so dangerous. What do you think this planet would look like if every single unplanned pregnancy was eliminated? I mean, I'm not talking about abortion here. I'm talking about that even before the whole process, before conception. That basically every conception was the direct result of purposeful planning. What do you think that would do to crime on this planet? What do you think that would do to welfare on this planet? Would we even need public schools? Can you imagine if every single pregnancy was the result of years of planning and even planning the costs? In other words, can you imagine what this world would look like if we did separate sex from procreation? I asked this question to a few pastors One pastor, or one guy, I don't think he calls himself a pastor, but one guy I know quite well, he has spent almost his whole life working with youth. He's a Christian. And like youth on the streets, youth, you name it, the worst case scenarios. And I asked him this question: what do you think would happen if every child produced on this planet was from the direct result of planning through in vitro fertilization? In other words, not through sex, but through, test tube. And I asked him, what do you think the effect would be on crime? He goes, oh, it would drop in half, at least, he said. What about welfare? Oh, it would drop, yeah. It would plummet. And so, yeah, I think by going against the Bible, it actually might help. It might help the world. If the Bible says that sex and procreation have to be in one flesh linked together, I actually think if we were to do the opposite, we'd have better outcomes. Oh, dangerous talk, right? Understanding in vitro fertilization. In vitro fertilization is a process in which medical doctors create human life. No! Outside they don't create, well, I can sort of see what the authors are saying here, but outside the boundaries of sexual intercourse. That's true. According to Pew, since 1996, more than 1 million babies in the United States, or 2% of children, have been born through some form of artificial reproductive technology. Is it that low? Okay, 2%. My guess is that's getting higher and higher as women choose to have children later in life. But yeah, basically what I did was, which is kind of funny. By the way, let me tell you one of the real reasons a lot of Christians are against in vitro fertilization. Because if you're a Christian man listening and you're thinking about doing this, you have to masturbate into a cup. Yeah, you do. A lot of Christians just, God's going to be mad or he's going to be sad. And so, right away, that's a non-starter for a lot of Christian men. Even a lot of Christian women say, no, I don't want my husband doing that. And then you take the sperm and combine it with eggs. I had to stick a needle in my wife's stomach. This was in Calgary because my wife needed the hormones to get the I forget. I'm not even going to guess the correct medical terms. But anyhow, I had to inject my wife with hormone, and it had to go in right below the belly button. Was it below the belly button? Yeah. And I had never given a needle to anyone before. But it had to be done at a certain time of day. And so anyhow, I had to do it instead of the doctor. And I practiced on an orange or a peach, taking a needle, and I tell you, that was hilarious. Seeing the expression on my wife, and then her husband with a needle coming down, and a very tender part of the body. But yeah, memories. IVF requires eggs and sperm to be harvested, yes. For men, this often involves masturbation, but may include surgical removal of sperm. Oh, yeah. I didn't do that. The woman's ovaries are hormonally stimulated to harvest. Yes, that's what I'm talking about. To harvest multiple eggs at once. That's what I had to do with the needle. Clinicians then create an embryo by fertilizing the egg in the lab before transferring the embryo into the woman's uterus. Yes. In fact, you can actually watch this happen. They have a big screen TV, and you can actually see the embryo go right into the uterus. It's quite amazing. In intracytoplasmic sperm injections, which are increasingly common, that's what I did. That cost me an extra $1,000 or $2,000. Doctors select a single sperm and inject it directly into the egg. Okay, yeah, and so that's the best way to get conception. If you guys want to know how much I spend on my kids, it's going to make you cry. I spent at least $100,000 for each child of mine. It took me probably 10 years to save that kind of money. Now, when I say 100,000, I just don't mean the in vitro, because my wife had other problems, and so it was C-sections. So, and then we had a whole bunch of surgeries before that. So I paid for 2 or 3 surgeries, 2 in vitros, 2 C-sections. What am I missing? and then all the other junk before that. So again, this was my point. Can you imagine what the world would look like if every child born cost $100,000? Now, a lot of people say, well, then only the rich would have kids. Well, I don't consider myself rich. I just considered myself a good planner for a decade to make it happen. Okay. Clinicians create, one cycle of IVF can produce multiple embryos, or only one. That's true. Even after transference, a woman's body can still reject the embryo. That's true, just like any other case. Embryos are not transferred, are usually stored. God bound sex and procreation together in creation. What God has joined together, no evangelical should separate. Yeah. Again, the theme of this video is if you're a Christian couple watching this in the future, my theme of this video is to say it's okay to make God mad and it's okay to make God sad. Do it. While this process seems like a safe medical treatment for infertility, moral questions abound. Questions about what happens to the embryos, for instance, are paramount. The embryo is a person and so deserves love and respect. Okay. There's a great thought experiment. If embryos are persons, then saving more people is better than saving less. Saving people is great. But if you had to put it on a scale of morality, saving 1,000 people would be better than saving one. But it's a moral dilemma. They're both great. They're both great. But the great thought experiment, whenever you hear someone, mostly Christians, say that the embryo is a person, is that thought experiment of you have a in vitro clinic is on fire, and there's 1,000 embryos, which according to this author are people, 1,000 embryos in petri dishes on the table, on the counter. And you have one toddler, 3 years old, in the corner. Maybe it was the toddler of a couple who's trying in vitro for the second time or whatever. And it's on fire. You got to save only one or two options. You can either save the toddler or save the 1,000 embryos. I guarantee you, Christians, that every single one of you would choose to save the toddler before 1,000 people, called embryos, according to this author. I guarantee you're going to do that. Why? Because your intuitions tell you that there's a difference between a toddler and 1,000 embryos. And that difference is huge. We've got a fully functioning human being with a brain, with nerves that can cry out, that can feel pain, that has memories, that other people have memories of that child. So if you truly, truly, truly believe that embryos are persons, then it's a no-brainer. You would let that toddler scream in pain and die, and you would save the 1,000 embryos. But you're not going to do that because you don't believe what you're saying. I'm very confident of this. But of course, I could be wrong. I actually asked that question of a Christian once, and he admitted he would do the wrong thing and save the toddler. That's how he put it. And he could be watching this video. And shame on you for saying that would be the wrong thing to do, save a toddler. But yeah, he said it would be the wrong thing to do to save the toddler, but he would save the toddler. He should have saved the 1,000 embryos. It's freezing them indefinitely or giving them to research just. Yeah, so what do you do with those unused embryos? Now, there's even adoption people. You can adopt embryos. You can freeze them and then give them up for adoption. Yeah. Even if a couple intends to transfer every embryo they create, what happens if the future events make that impossible? Yes. Yeah. This brings back so many bad memories. When we had that time of something like 8 embryos frozen, and we were waiting, do we implant them or whatever? The thought occurred to us, we might get in a car accident and both die. What do we do with these 8? Can you imagine just, I get tired just thinking about it. We have to make a will out for these 8 embryos? This was insanity. Some couples get pregnant naturally after undergoing IVF, very few, or are otherwise prevented from following on their own intentions, leaving their embryos in frozen limbo. Throw them down the sink. I encourage Christians listening, it's okay to make your God mad or sad. What's the worst that could happen? Well, we'll go to hell, Doug. That's what they're thinking. Evangelical couples aware of such questions have increasingly opted to only create a single embryo at a time. Yeah, that gets very expensive very fast. Yet the separation of conception from sexual intercourse raises problems on its own, problems that outweigh any justification for using IVF to overcome infertility. Like what? To put our worry bluntly, God bound sex and procreation together in creation, and what God has joined together, no evangelical should separate. No. Thank you, Mavortius. No, it's okay to make God mad. It's okay to make him sad. Go ahead. What's the worst that could happen? Okay, Bible and IVF. For many Christians, Scripture silence about IVF means that the only moral question is how we treat embryos created in the process. Such an argument, though intrinsically undermines the normativity of Genesis 1 and 2 for both sexual ethics and bioethics, a normativity that Jesus himself ratifies in Matthew 19, clearly indicates that human fertility has been folded by God into the structure of creation and into his providential plan for Earth's cultivation. Okay, so quoting Scripture here, there's so many inconsistencies with this. It's basically saying don't do in vitro fertilization because God's plan was for men and women to come together as one flesh, and that sex and procreation are combined together. And if you separate them, you're going against God's plan. But yet Christians would be so inconsistent when they are talking about life. Like my niece was born 1 pound, 14 ounces. Hey, thank you so much, Rob. And she would be dead today. My niece would be dead today if it wasn't for modern science. Now, nowhere do Christians, very rarely do I hear Christians cry out and say, no, we got to let these babies die who are born premature, because that would be God's plan. God wanted the baby to come out prematurely. God wanted this baby to be 1 pound, 14 ounces, and God wanted this baby not to be able to self-sustain itself. So let it die. Don't put it in those incubators and hook up all those tubes to that baby. You know, how many Christians would talk like that? Very, very, very few. So I see inconsistencies here. And while Genesis 2:22-25 does not mention procreation directly, the interdependence of sex and generation is explicitly presumed. The man and woman cleave to each other and become one flesh, but they do so only within the context already structured by kinship bonds established by procreation. Therefore, a man shall leave his father and mother. Sexual intercourse is inherently and intrinsically ordained by God toward procreation. A union that is one flesh cannot escape this reality, even if the couple chooses to deny it. Okay? I feel like just saying, so what? To view this interdependency as simply contingent rather than normative radically undermines the place of Genesis 1 and 2 in both theological and... Okay, so again, I'm going to just speak this from the point of view of the Christian who believes in Genesis 1 and 2. And I'm just going to say, go ahead and do it anyhow. Go ahead and risk making your God sad or mad. Do you think God's going to hurt you? Do you think God's going to cause you to go to hell? If that's what you think, then do you really, just for the fact of wanting a child, that God's going to punish you and hurt you, do you really want to stay in this type of religion? Why not, here's an out for you. Why not become a deist? Believe in some type of deity type God that's loving or caring or whatever, and just reject Christianity. And I think this is why I say Christianity is a religion about carrots and sticks. A lot of them are just this fear of burning in hell. That's why they can't do it. But then they're going to be so sad. there's probably Christian couples out there who can afford in vitro fertilization and who purposely have chosen not to because of garbage like what I'm reading. Such a principle is not, in this way, only founded on biology or considerations from natural law. It stands beneath the whole of how Scripture speaks about marriage, children, and God's action in bringing about both. Oh, let me be clear here. There's probably a lot of Christians who agree with me here and would not take the very conservative stance that this author or authors are taking. The biological reality of procreation simply demonstrates how special and general revelations speak with one voice. Children are a heritage and a gift from the Lord. Yeah, we are fearfully and wonderfully made. This is why I think part of the reason why Christians are so against abortion. Hey, thank you, Adam. Is because of this idea that embryos are gifts from God rather than a consequence of an egg and sperm coming together. I could say things about that, but I'll let it go. Okay, 4 concerns about IVF. Let's move on. IVF severs the unified goods of marriage. Unified goods of marriage? In the first place, okay, this is basically the same thing of separating sex from procreation. And my advice to Christians is go ahead and risk making your God mad or sad and just say, so what? Okay, number 2. IVF reconfigures our understanding of human life. Okay, this is interesting. While those who pursue in vitro fertilization are often animated by love for each other, the specific acts that bring about human life are disconnected from the loving union that ordinary conception involves. What? Do you think I honestly love my wife less when we did in vitro fertilization? Just because... Actually, my daughter's probably listening. Like, how sick is that somehow love drops when coitus is not involved in procreation? That's what it sounds like this author is saying. But this point, yeah, and I used the word coitus on purpose. But this point introduces new factors into our understanding of where human life comes from. The ordinary acts of procreative love, there is no question who is conceiving the child. The process of generating life is begun and completed wholly by the couple. Third parties are only involved externally. They aid and support the process. Yeah. This just reeks of, this is just too uncomfortable for us, so it must be sin. The presence of multiple parties in conceiving life, though, introduces peculiar uncertainties and risks for the children who are born. Can we say that a married couple conceived this child or the doctors? So who cares who conceived it? In cases of ordinary procreation, children might have complaints against their parents or God for how their life goes. What? But in cases of extracorporeal conception, such complaints might reasonably conclude that lab technicians materially involved in their conception. The diffusion of agents in creating human life that IVF demands risks diminishing the child's sense that they were knit together. Oh my goodness. Do you think my children think that they're somewhat less of human beings or have some type of existential crisis because their embryo started in a petri dish? This is just rubbish. IVF tampers with human life and human dignity. The process of conceiving life in a lab establishes a principle of efficiency that intrinsically and inexorably inclines participant in the process toward weighing the value of persons based on the quality of their lives. In ordinary procreation, the human person emerges from a mysterious, invisible process of organic development. Oh my goodness. If it's not mystery, it's not good. While we know from science what happens in the early days of conception, it is a work that remains hidden from the couple or any other human beings. Conception is an exceedingly fragile event, whether in the womb or in the lab, but the doctor's presence within the process of forming human life practically demands grading embryos for their viability, yes, and opting to use those that seem to show the best quality, yes. They used, when my children were conceived, they used the best sperm from me and the best eggs from my wife. And then they looked at the embryos and they put the best ones into to my wife's uterus. It's almost like this author is saying it's not good to judge embryos based on quality. It almost sounds like that it's wrong to say one embryo is better than another because you might hurt the embryo's feelings. I don't know. Such a tendency within the practice itself will make pre-implantation genetic diagnosis almost an inevitable feature. Okay, so now, to me, this is the first real criticism when we're talking about some ethical considerations, and that is, what happens if we come to the point where most pregnancies are done through in vitro fertilization, and we can look at the genetic codes of these embryos and say, oh, this baby's going to have blue eyes. Oh, this baby is going to have a lot of fast twitch muscle fiber and be a really good athlete. Or, oh, the genetic information says this embryo is going to be, I don't know if there's a gene for IQ, but I don't think there is. So that is an ethical consideration that if we start going down this path, maybe we will be procreating a super species of humans that all might look alike, because people will all have a desire for babies to look a certain way, to act a certain way. But let me ask you this. If you knew that certain diseases are caused by certain genes, and if we could snip those genes out, or not implant that embryo with those genes in and fact choose a different embryo, wouldn't that lower the pain and suffering of your child's life? Because they wouldn't have that disease. This is where Christianity, this is where religion goes in direct conflict with real human suffering. And why I think religion like this is evil. Because it divorces ethical concerns from real human suffering. In fact, Christianity is a religion that encourages suffering for Christ's sake. IVF poses risks to women's health. Okay, this is probably one I'm going to agree with. But I would say that all pregnancy poses risk to women's health. Finally, procreating human life is not only an immensely fragile process, but an extremely risky one as well, and the children created are subject to those risks. In the short term, pregnancies from artificial reproductive technologies are more likely to be subject to complications. That's true. When you see a woman over 35 with twins, you could probably bet a few C notes that she's had in vitro fertilization process done to her. The long-term effects of such treatment on children conceived through them are still wholly unknown. Oh, man, this is like vaccine fears is kind of popped in my head there. But those risks are even more pressing for women. Yeah, the risks for women are having twins or triplets. And that's not good. The risks for the women go up exponentially if you have twins or triplets or quadruplets. As mentioned above, the process of harvesting eggs is exceedingly invasive and requires no more invasive than having knee surgery. It requires the non-therapeutic use of hormones. Yes, what's wrong with that? The long-term effects of this. You know how many women use hormones when they hit menopause? Like, are you going to be against that, Christian author here? The long-term effects of this procedure are, as with children, disputable, but that's partially because fertility treatments are a lucrative industry. Oh yeah, big pharma, right? And there's systemic pressure to avoid closely considering such questions. As medical anthropologist Diane Tober admitted in the Washington Post, there's no known risks to fertility treatments because no one has looked. No one has looked? We have 4 decades of kids being born from in vitro fertilization, normal, healthy kids. The double burden IVF places on women should be sufficient by itself for evangelicals to say no. The double burden IVF places on women. No. This is when you have an infertile couple who are willing to take the risks of, let's say, having twins because they really desire to have children. They have weighed the risks with the benefits, and they have chosen to take that risk. And that, in my opinion, if you're implanting 2 or 3 embryos, the risk is quite small. There's actual stats on that. I think it's 7% chance of getting twins. So you can actually calculate these risks. And the risks of having children the good old-fashioned way, through coitus, is still, above 0. There's still risk with that as well. And yet people have kids all the time the natural way. Oh yeah, look at this. As a practice, IVF has generated millions of embryo deaths, which raises questions about complicity and systems founded upon moral wrongs, even if an individual's couple's intentions are pure. Yeah, embryo deaths. I personally right now don't view an embryo death much differently than I was going to say like a cheek cell death, which happens all the time. But I do think an embryo cell or embryo, which is anywhere from, they call it a blastocyst in the 8-cell stage, and then they go up to 16 cells. They are more valuable in the sense that they're more limited because the number of eggs, the amount of sperm is not limited really, but the number of eggs per month is limited. So it has more value than, let's say, a cheek cell. Pastoral considerations. Just hang on a second. Pastoral considerations. We recognize that this is a hard word to those couples who long for children. Few desires run as deep as that one, and it can seem like a cruel burden to be denied what God seemed to give so freely to other people. Yeah, so basically, to tell people that they shouldn't do in vitro fertilization because it's a sin, maybe, is a cruel burden. The gospel is good news for childless couples who have hope in Christ, not in procreation. Pastoral counsel from within the gospel, though, requires clear-headed thinking. Those hearts are broken and sorrow, need direction. Yeah, again, if you're a Christian couple who have got this far in my video, even if everything this author is saying is true, by the way, who are these authors? Even if everything they're saying is true, Matthew Lee Anderson and Andrew T. Walker, I encourage you to go ahead and purposely make your God mad and purposely make your God sad. And I am quite confident that nothing bad will happen to you, and that your probability of having a child that you so desperately desire might come to fruition, might happen. So go ahead and do it. Even if everything these authors are saying, go ahead and purposely disobey your God and do it. Because the worst that could happen is God's sad for a day or two. He'll get over it. Now, I wanted to show that not all Christians think this way. And this is from the Gospel Coalition. I put the link in the description. And here's a Christian who's basically saying, no, in vitro fertilization is okay because overcoming infertility is pleasing to God because God wants image bearers in the world, and that modern medicine in general is a divine blessing, that God uses medicine to do his purpose. We should treat the unborn child as a human person from the moment of conception. This is where this particular author agrees with the previous authors that you probably shouldn't throw embryos down the sink. And children should only be conceived by and born to married men and women. That's probably a no-brainer for most Christians. Therefore, IVF is a morally good action in some circumstances. Oh, he even goes into the costs here. In the United States, $12,000 to $15,000. That's just for the IVF procedure. That doesn't include all the drugs and all the other stuff. Yeah, what did I pay? I think just for the IVF procedure alone, I paid $7,000 or $8,000 for my son and $5,000 or $6,000 for my daughter. Then I spent another $2,000 to $4,000 on drugs each. Yeah. So I actually know that that there's a very good chance that there are going to be Christians watching this who are infertile. And if you believe in a type of God who will hurt you, punish you for doing in vitro fertilization, even if these authors are correct, like I said, go ahead and do it anyhow. Purposely sin. And because that sin will result probably in a beautiful child born to you. Yeah, I probably shouldn't have said that. That will cause them to click off. But it's challenge number one. If you are a Christian who believes in science, believes in experimenting, don't tithe for 3 months. See what happens to your life. See if God punishes you or anything bad happens, other than your God being sad or mad. Number two, don't pray for 3 months. Take that challenge. See if anything bad happens to you. Experiment. Just experiment to see if your God is real. If it actually makes a difference. I actually think some of you Christians listening will do much better in life if you stop praying. But some of you, I don't know. Some of you just need it so desperately. Otherwise, your life is just a mess, I guess. Maybe that's a good harbinger of atheists to come, is like, or a non-Christian to be, is how much you need prayer. I think prayer is a big one. DB Cisco, I bought a Corvette and a Z28 instead. Instead of what? Having kids? I find no bigger turn on in a woman than knowing she's infertile. Adam asks, seriously, Christians, what is the downside? You sin now, right? Yeah, you sin already. What's one more? I don't know. Do you think what I said will resonate? Like, there's going to be Christian apologists who watch this on the replay who are just literal fear that other Christians might actually take my advice. Like, they are terrified. Like, for a guy like me to basically dare Christians to make their God sad, to make their God mad. Sorry, to make God mad, to make God sad. You're playing with fire, Doug. You're playing with fire. IVF is free on the NHS? What? You mean I spent all that money for nothing, Amelia? Okay. Thanks, guys, for hanging out. I don't know if any apologists are the result of IVF. I doubt it. Yeah, if you make God sad or mad, he might snuff you out. Poof you. Have a great day, guys.